So we all know that crypto loves to trade based on the strongest narrative. Is there going to be a strategic Bitcoin reserve? Is Trump going to get into office? Are interest rates going to go down? Did FTX just collapse? People will look at the charts and then apparently, according to this theory, justify why they're going up or down. But in reality, there's only one real narrative that matters. And this narrative has a 94% success rate in predicting which way Bitcoin is going to go historically. So naturally, that's caught my attention. Now here on this channel, we like to follow the top influencers and the biggest brain traders in the world because normally they know more than everybody else. They have the best track records. That's what makes them the best traders. And to follow anyone else would just seem absolutely absurd. So when multiple people like Peter from House of Crypto, his last 3 videos, Raoul Pal, I think probably one of the originators of this theory, at least from what I've seen. A lot of work links back to Raoul Pal. Even Kyron from No BS Crypto, they're all talking about this one factor with 94% correlation. Now, have a look at this. You may have heard what it is before. They say the correlation between Bitcoin's price and the M2 money supply has been notably strong over the past decade. Long-term analysis indicate a correlation coefficient as high as 0.94%, meaning 94% of the time, if you followed this indicator, you'd know exactly what Bitcoin and therefore all the altcoins were about to do, suggesting a very strong positive relationship between global liquidity, which is the same as M2 money supply. We're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what it is, and Bitcoin's price movements. This means as the M2 money supply expands, Bitcoin's price has historically tended to rise and vice versa. And another influencer who strongly believes in the M2 thesis is Murad, saying, cleanest Bitcoin chart in the game right now is Bitcoin over the M2 money supply. And you can see these are this 2017, 2018 boom. This is the 2021 boom. You can see based on where we're currently at with the money supply at the moment, we haven't even reached the all-time highs. And if this is the super cycle, as Murad is predicting it's going to be, we are going to be heading well above these points. In fact, we want these peaks to look like this peak back then. So we want to be 100 to 150% higher than those last peaks. And if you plot the chart yourself, you can see the dark blue here is the money supply, the M2 global money supply that is. So that's all countries. Again, we're going to talk about exactly what it is in a second. And the light blue one is the price of Bitcoin. You can see this dip recently, and the light blue has almost exactly followed the dip in money supply worldwide. Now, you may also be like, wait a second, why does it say offset 107? Well, that's also really important. I'm going to tell you exactly why 107 is set up here, because according to a couple of these really smart traders, this gives us an exact date on when Bitcoin is going to skyrocket past $110,000 from its current lows. But before we get to that date, let's get really, really clear on what is the M2 money supply. Because if you know this, you can predict Bitcoin's price up to 94% of the time accurately. So M2 is a way of measuring how much money people have, both the money that they can spend right now and the money that they're saving but can get pretty easily. That's the difference between M1, because there's 3 M money supplies. M1 is just really liquid savings, just absolute cash. And then M2 is also the money that they're saving but can get access to if needed pretty easily. It has 2 parts: spendable money, such as the cash in your wallet, the money in your checking account, and the stuff you can instantly use, plus the stuff you can get pretty easily, like money in a savings account, short-term bank deposits like a 3-month term deposit, which take a little bit more time to access, but they are still yours. Now you can see it says how much money people have. Where does money come from? Well, it comes from the government printing more money. That's the liquidity. And so it comes from every single government worldwide turning on their money printers and having what's called quantitative easing. Batman tweets, global M2 tracks the total money supply in circulation. Basically, global liquidity is a really easy way to view it. When liquidity rises globally, just like if it rises in your family, you're going to get more spendy and buy more assets, or assets that go up or down, doesn't have to be good assets. Just like when liquidity rises in the world, they're going to be buying more assets, which that liquidity will eventually flow into the hardest, best performing assets, riskiest assets as well, like Bitcoin. It eventually makes its way into the economy, pushing up risk assets like Bitcoin, but there's always a lag. This is that 107-day lag, usually 1 to 3 months, which he's saying 30 days to 90 days, but I'm going to show you why that 107 number seems way more accurate, before the effect shows up in the market. So the money printers go on, liquidity flows into the world, into the pockets of all the civilians and people who like trading into risk assets, and then it takes about 1 to 3 months to flow down into the pockets of people who like trading risk assets, because it starts really high. And this is called the Cantillon effect, where basically the big bureaucrats and the aristocrats and the big money and the corporations who get access to that money first get to spend it before the inflation takes place, which is a little bit outside the scope of this video, but a very fascinating way that's making us poorer and poorer without us even knowing, which is why I personally want to be investing in decentralized assets like Bitcoin, because they're just going to absorb all this global liquidity, maintaining the value of my money over time. Right now, global M2 is climbing fast. This is what I haven't mentioned yet. It is on the rise, while Bitcoin is still pulling back. M2 has been rising since January, and with this time lag in mind, it looks like we're getting very close to Bitcoin catching up and rallying again. Whereas my graph right here, you can see M2 has had a sharp increase all the way up to $110,000 on the Bitcoin chart, and Bitcoin is yet to follow. There's a date down here, which I'm going to tell you in a second when I personally think that is. Max Brown says Bitcoin always follows global liquidity. M2 money supply is increasing, and soon Bitcoin will explode to $110,000. Exactly what we've been talking about. DeFi Bank says M2 liquidity surge is incoming. The M2 Global Liquidity Index, which is on the white line of this graph right here, you can see that surge up there, with a 91% correlation over 360 days. Remember, it had a 94% correlation over the decade. Over 360 days, it's a 91% correlation. Historically, Bitcoin lags behind that 30 days to 107 days. But when liquidity flows, Bitcoin follows. We're right at the breakout zone. If M2 keeps pumping, Bitcoin is primed for a massive move. March to April could be the launch pad. And House of Crypto talks about the M2 money supply a lot and how it's the biggest indicator on which direction the whole market's going to go. And he's predicted in here, I think he had a 70-day lag up here. You can see index 70, which is 70-day offset for those two graphs. He predicted about March 24th, which is in about 6 days, will be the real turnaround for the price of Bitcoin. He thinks there could be a little bit of a pullback before then to match that graph, and then not skyrocketing, but slowly over time heading towards that beautiful $110,000. However, Colin Talks Crypto on Twitter, come give him a follow. He's got this awesome breakdown here about global M2 and how it's at its all-time high. However, he's done the math in a video that you can come and watch here, where he tests each time shift of the M2 money supply. So at a 45-day shift, 75, all the way up to a 107-day shift, 105-day shift, I believe he tests in this video. And the best correlation, because he gets the correlation numbers against the M2 and Bitcoin, the best correlation ended up being a 107-day offset. So if you look at this photo, you can see it almost tracks it exactly. And you can see the percentage correlation here. Over 35 days, it's 75%, 60 days, 90%, 9 days, 80%, 180 days, basically 90%, a year, 90%, 1.5 years, 90%, and 2 years, 80%, which is pretty crazy that you can predict the price of Bitcoin in advance at about an 80 to 90% correlation. Deep Value Memetics also believes that this insane correlation is going to continue. It'd be pretty crazy to bet against it at this point. He says global M2 at all-time high and you're bearish. We've got the liquidity surge with global M2 at the all-time high. We have the rate cuts ahead. We have record cash on the sidelines, which is the thing about the M2 money supply. You just have to realize this is real cash. There was something like 102 trillion up to $107 trillion now in liquidity, which is $5 trillion of cash ready to be deployed into assets. And if you're like, wait a second, how can global liquidity go down? Because once the money's printed, doesn't it just keep circulating? Well, it's a great question. It goes down when it gets invested into assets that aren't easily liquid and accessible. And so basically you have the government printing money and then people spending the money and it going away into these assets. And that's why the theory is that Bitcoin will always go up over time, is because the governments will keep on printing for no cost. There's nothing that backs the US dollar. There's nothing that's behind the US dollar, apart from maybe the defense force. But they can print as much money as possible. And so can every other economy in the world. And they can just turn on the money printer. They can put the numbers in the machine and make it up and dilute the value of everyone's money in their nation. And that dilution and that liquidity will eventually flow into the hardest assets like Bitcoin, and trillions of dollars worth is coming. Remember, the market cap of Bitcoin right now is still under $2 trillion. He also says markets are oversold, all major indices trading below 200-day moving averages. Inflation is cooling faster than expected. Global central banks are easing ECB, BOJ, and PBOC, and AI advancements should increase global productivity and bottom line, so everybody gets richer with technology. That's the ultimate leverage on the world's finite resources. It's like, why can we all have an iPhone, which is more powerful than the computer that put people on the moon back in 1960s? Well, because of the power of technology. Michael R. Sullivan says, I'm once again reminding you that global M2 is on the rise. MicroStrategy is going to sniff this out before Bitcoin. He believes that the MicroStrategy stock will actually react to the news before Bitcoin because it is a publicly traded company. And of course, if you graph the S&P 500 index across the M2 money supply, you're going to see a high correlation as well. Patience, liquidity is coming. Now, if we head back to that graph, 107-day offset, what data does that give us for the blast off? It gives us April 30. So if you go off Peter from House of Cryptos, you've got March 24. If you go off Colin Talks Crypto, you've got April 30. Sometime between then, the market is going to turn around with, using historic data, a 90% certainty. Make sure you're ready because with some luck, this is the super cycle that we've all been waiting for.